Chapter 9 of Silence and Secrecy, and of the barbarous names of evocation. It is found by experience, confirming the statement of Zoroaster 1 that the most potent conjurations are those in an ancient and perhaps forgotten language, or even those couched in a corrupt and possibly always meaningless jargon. Of these there are several main types. The preliminary invocation in the Geisha consists principally of corruptions of Greek and Egyptian names. 2 For example, we find Osor and Ephorus for Asar Nefer. 3 The conjurations given by Dr. D. Vidi Equinox I. 8, are in a language called Angelic, or Enochian. Its source has hitherto baffled research, but it is a language and not a jargon, for it possesses a structure of its own, and there are traces of grammar and syntax. However this may be, it works. Even the beginner finds that things happen when he uses it, and this is an advantage or disadvantage! Shared by no other type of language. The rest needs skill. This needs prudence. The Egyptian invocations are much purer, but their meaning has not been sufficiently studied by persons magically competent. We possess a number of invocations in Greek of every degree of excellence, in Latin but few, and those of inferior quality. It will be noted that in every case the conjurations are very sonorous, and there is a certain magical voice in which they should be recited. This special voice was a natural gift of the master Therion, but it can be taught to the right people. 4 Various considerations impelled him to attempt conjurations in the English language. There already existed on example, the charm of the witches in Macbeth. Although this was perhaps not meant seriously, its effect is indubitable. 1 He has found iambic tetrameters enriched with many rhymes both internal and external very useful. The Wizard Way, Equinox I. 1, gives a good idea of the sort of thing. So does the evocation of Bart Sable in Equinox I. 9. There are many extant invocations throughout his works, in many kinds of meter, of many kinds of being, and for many kinds of purpose. See Appendix I. Other methods of incantation are on record as efficacious. For instance, Fratri.A.2 When a child was told that he could invoke the devil by repeating the Lord Prayer backwards. He went into the garden and did so. The devil appeared, and almost scared him out of his life. It is therefore not quite certain in what the efficacy of conjurations really lies. The peculiar mental excitement required may even be aroused by the perception of the absurdity of the process, and the persistence in it, as when once Frater Pidurabo, at the end of his magical resources, recited from Greenland's icy mountains, and obtained his result. 3 It may be conceded in any cases that the long strings of formidable words which roar and moan through so many conjurations have a real effect in exalting the consciousness of the magician to the proper pitch. That they should do so is no more extraordinary than that music of any kind should do so. Magicians have not confined themselves to the use of the human voice. The panpipe with its 7 stops, corresponding to the 7 planets, the bull roarer, the tom-tom, and even the violin, have all been used, as well as many others, of which the most important is the bell. For through this is used not so much for actual conjuration as to mark stages in the ceremony. Of all these the tom-tom will be found to be the most generally useful. While on the subject of barbarous names of evocation, we should not omit the utterance of certain supreme words which enshrine, the complete formula of the god invoked, or, the whole ceremony. Examples of the former kind are Tetragrammaton, Iou, and Abrahadabra. An example of the latter kind is the great word Stabech Ph Mephshis, which is a line drawn on the tree of life. Coptic attributions, in a certain manner. 1 With all such words it is of the utmost importance that they should never be spoken until the supreme moment, and even then they should burst from the magician almost despite himself, so great should be his reluctance to utter them. In fact, they should be the utterance of the god in him at the first onset of the divine possession. So uttered, they cannot fail of effect, for they have become the effect. Every wise magician will have constructed, according to the principles of the Holy Kabbalah, many such words, and he should have quintessentialized them all in one word, which last word, once he has formed it, he should never utter consciously even in thought, until perhaps with it he gives up the ghost. Such a word should in fact be so potent that man cannot hear it and live. Such a word was indeed the lost Tetragrammaton. 3. It is said that at the utterance of this name the universe crashes into dissolution. Let the magician earnestly seek this lost word, for its pronunciation is synonymous with the accomplishment of the great work. In this matter of the efficacy of words there are again two formulas exactly opposite in nature. A word may become potent and terrible by virtue of constant repetition. At first the statement "so and so is God" excites no interest. Continue, and you meet scorn and skepticism, possibly persecution. Continue, and the controversy has so far died out that no one troubles to contradict your assertion. No superstition is so dangerous and so lively as an exploded superstition. The newspapers of today, written and edited almost exclusively by men without a spark of religion or morality, dare not hint that anyone disbelieves in the ostensibly prevailing cult. They deplore atheism all but universal in practice and implicit in the theory of practically all intelligent people, as if it were the eccentricity of a few negligible or objectionable persons. This is the ordinary story of advertisement. The sham has exactly the same chance as the real. Persistence is the only quality required for success. The opposite formula is that of secrecy. An idea is perpetuated because it must never be mentioned. A Freemason never forgets the secret words entrusted to him, though these words mean absolutely nothing to him. In the vast majority of cases, the only reason for this is that he has been forbidden to mention them, although they have been published again and again, and as are accessible to the profane or to the initiate. In such a work of practical magic as the preaching of a new law, these methods may be advantageously combined. On the one hand, infinite frankness and readiness to communicate all secrets, on the other the sublime and terrible knowledge that all real secrets are incommunicable. 1. It is, according to tradition, a certain advantage in conjurations to employ more than one language. In all probability the reason of this is that any change spurs the flagging attention. A man engages in intense mental labor will frequently stop and walk up and down the room, one may suppose for this cause, but it is a sign of weakness that this should be necessary. For the beginner in magic, however, it is permissible to employ any device to secure the result. Conjurations should be recited, not read. 3 And the entire ceremony should be so perfectly performed that one is hardly conscious of any effort of memory. The ceremony should be constructed with such logical fatality that a mistake is impossible. 1 The conscious ego of the magician is to be destroyed to be absorbed in that of the god whom he invokes, and the process should not interfere with the automaton who is performing the ceremony. But this ego of which it is here spoken is the true ultimate ego. The automaton should possess will, energy, intelligence, reason and resource. This automaton should be the perfect man far more than any other man can be. It is only the divine self within the man, a self as far above the possession of will or any other qualities whatsoever as the heavens are high above the earth, that should reabsorb itself into that illimitable radiance of which it is a spark. 2 The great difficulty for the single magician is so to perfect himself that these three multifarious duties of the ritual are adequately performed. At first he will find that the exaltation destroys memory and paralyzes muscle. This is an essential difficulty of the magical process, and can only be overcome by practice and experience. 3 In order to aid concentration, and to increase the supply of energy, it has been customary for the magician to employ assistants or colleges. It is doubtful whether the obvious advantages of this plan compensate the difficulty of procuring suitable persons, for and the chance of a conflict of will or a misunderstanding in the circle itself. On one occasion Fratipa Jurabo was disobeyed by an assistant, and had it not been for his promptitude in using the physical compulsion of the sword, it is probable that the circle would have been broken. As it was, the affair fortunately terminated in nothing more serious than the destruction of the culprit. However, there is no doubt that an assemblage of persons who really are in harmony can much more easily produce an effect than a magician working by himself. The psychology of revival meetings will be familiar to almost everyone, and though such meetings one are the foulest and the most degraded rituals of black magic, The laws of magic are not thereby suspended. The laws of magic are the laws of nature. A singular and world-famous example of this is of sufficiently recent date to be fresh in the memory of many people now living. At a nigger camp meeting in United States of America, these pseudo-human brutes, many of them scarcely superior to their white neighbors, were worked up to such a pitch of excitement that the whole assembly developed a furious form of hysteria. The comparatively intelligible cries of glory and hallelujah no longer expressed the situation. Somebody screamed out "Tararabumda!" and this was taken up by the whole meeting and yelled continuously, until reaction set in. The whole affair got into the papers, and some particularly bright disciple of John Stuart Mill, logician and economist, thought that these words, having set one set of fools crazy, might do the same to all the other fools in the world. He accordingly wrote a song, and produced the desired result. This is the most notorious example in recent times of the power exerted by a barbarous name of evocation. A few words may be useful to reconcile the general notion of causality with that of magic. How can we be sure that a person waving a stick and howling thereby produces thunderstorms? In no other way than that familiar to science, we note that whenever we put a lighted match to dry gunpowder, an unintelligibly arbitrary phenomenon, that of sound, is observed, and so forth. We need not dwell upon this point, but it seems worthwhile to answer one of the objections to the possibility of magic, choosing one which is at first sight of an obviously fatal character. It is convenient to quote verbatim from the Diary 3 of a very distinguished magician and philosopher. For I have noticed that the effect of a magical work has followed it so closely that it must have been started before the time of the word. For example, I work tonight to make X in Paris write to me. I get the letter the next morning, so it must have been written before the work. Does this deny that the work caused the effect? If I strike a billiard ball, and it moves, both my will and its motion are due to causes long antecedent to the act. I may consider both my work and its reaction as twin effects of the eternal universe. The moved arm and ball are parts of a state of the cosmos which resulted necessarily from its momentarily previous state, and so, back forever. Thus, my magical work is only one of the cause-effects necessarily concomitant with the cause-effects which set the ball in motion. I may therefore regard the act of striking as a cause-effect of my original will to move the ball, though necessarily previous to its motion. But the case of magical work is not quite analogous. For my nature is such that I am compelled to perform magic in order to make my will to prevail, so that the cause of my doing the work is also the cause of the ball-less motion, and there is no reason why one should precede the other. Cf. Lewis Carroll, where the Red Queen screams before she pricks her finger. 1. Let me illustrate the theory by an actual example. I write from Italy to a man in France and another in Australia on the same day, telling them to join me. Both arrive 10 days later, the first in answer to my letter, which he received, the second on his own initiative, as it would seem. But I summoned him because I wanted him, and I wanted him because he was my representative, and his intelligence made him resolve to join me because it judged rightly that the situation, so far as he knew it, was such as to make me desire his presence. The same cause, therefore, which made me write to him come to me. And though it would be improper to say that the writing of the letter was the direct cause of his arrival, it is evident that if I had not written I should have been different from what I actually am, and therefore my relations with him would have been otherwise than they are. In this sense, therefore, the letter and the journey are causally connected. One cannot go farther, and say that in this case I ought to write the letter even if he had arrived before I did so. For it is a part of the whole set of circumstances that I do not use a crowbar on an open door. The conclusion is that one should do one's will without lust of result. If one is working in accordance with the laws of one's own nature, one is doing right, and no such work can be criticized as useless, even in cases of the character here discussed. So long as one's will prevails, there is no cause for complaint. To abandon one's magic would show lack of self-confidence in one's powers, and doubt as to one's inmost faith in the self and in nature. Of course one changes one's methods as experience indicates, but there is no need to change them on any such ground as the above. Further, the argument here set forth disposes of the need to explain the modus operandi of magic. A successful operation does not involve any theory soever, not even that of the existence of causality itself. The whole set of phenomena may be conceived as single. For instance, if I see a star, as it was years ago, I need not assume causal relations as existing between it, the earth, and myself. The connection exists, I can predicate nothing beyond that. Similarly, when I do magic, it is in vain to inquire why I so act, or why the desired result does or does not follow. Nor can I know how the previous and subsequent conditions are connected. At most I can describe the consciousness which I interpret as a picture of the facts, and make empirical generalizations of the superficial aspects of the case. Thus, I have my own personal impressions of the act of telephoning, but I cannot be aware what consciousness, electricity, mechanics, sound, etc., actually are in themselves. And although I can appeal to experience to lay down laws as to what conditions accompany the act, I can never be sure that they have always been, or ever will again be, identical. In fact, it is certain that an event can never occur twice in precisely the same circumstances. One further, my laws must always take nearly all the more important elements of knowledge for granted. I cannot say finally how an electric current is generated. I cannot be sure that some totally unsuspected force is not at work in some entirely arbitrary way. For example, it was formerly supposed that hydrogen and chlorine would unite when an electric spark was passed through the mixture. Now we know too that the presence of a minute quantity of aqueous vapor, or some tertium quid 3, is essential to the reaction. We formulated before the days of Ross the laws of malarial fever, without reference to the mosquito. We might discover one day that the germ is only active when certain events are transpiring in some nebula, or when so apparently inert a substance as argon is present in the air in certain proportions. We may therefore admit quite cheerfully that magic is as mysterious as mathematics, as empirical as poetry, as uncertain as golf, and as dependent on a personal equation as love. That is no reason why we should not study, practice, and enjoy it, for it is a science in exactly the same sense as biology. It is no less art than sculpture, and it is a sport as much as mountaineering. Indeed, there seems to be no undue presumption in urging that no science possesses equal possibilities of deep and important knowledge. 5 That no art offers such opportunities to the ambition of the soul to express its truth, in ecstasy, through beauty, and that no sport rivals its fascinations of danger and delight, so excites, exercises, and tests its devotees to the uttermost, or so rewards them by well-being, pride, and the passionate pleasures of personal triumph. Magic takes every thought and act for its apparatus, it has the universe for its library and its laboratory, all nature is its subject, and its game, free from close seasons and protective restrictions, always abounds in infinite variety, being all that exists. No man but must, will he nill he, be a magician. His personal problem is this: whether he rank with Lydia Pinkham or Sir William Thomson, Lord Leighton or Franz Hals, Tartarin of Tarascon or Oscar Eckenstein. My own intense absorption in magic has not prevented will ere long be recognized as inaugurating an epoch, from being the only English poet of the first rank in my generation, and from holding the lioness share of the world's mountaineering records. Nay, in sooth, it has made me the I am that I am.